And as we often say, countless stories, one planet. So let's bring it all together. We start in South Africa, where International Relations and Cooperations Minister Ronald Lamola says they will persuade G20 leaders who will be present to adopt leaders' declaration without the United States presence. He says the summit will forge ahead without other key leaders such as Donald Trump, Russia's Vladimir Putin, and China's Xi Jinping. Lamola says they will mark the US as absent from the summit because they were invited.
So in their absence, the countries that are present must take a decision. And that is what is currently unfolding. The Sherpas are negotiating the leaders' declaration. We are moving towards making a decision in terms of the leaders' declaration. Negotiations are happening. But we are forging ahead to persuade the countries that are present that we must adopt a leaders' declaration.
The former Prime Minister of Bangladesh, Sheikh Hasina, has dismissed the judgment condemning her to death as politically motivated and called the use of death penalty distasteful. A special tribunal found she was responsible for ordering a violent crackdown on student-led protests last year. More than 1,000 people were killed during the protests that toppled her government. Hasina is currently in exile in India. The BBC's Arona De Mukherjee has more outside the court in Dhaka.
Where I'm standing, I've been seeing a small group of people erupt in joy and sort of chant, sloganeering, saying, "We demand that Sheikh Hasina be hanged." There are also sort of chants in support of the verdict that I can hear just outside the court premises, very loud chants, in fact, as soon as the verdict came out. So it has certainly been an emotive trial, and the verdict equally eliciting those kind of emotions as I can pick up here on the ground.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has secured an important deal to obtain air defense hardware from France. He signed the agreement to acquire up to 100 Rafale jet fighters, missile and drone systems with his French counterpart Emmanuel Macron at an airbase near Paris. The two men also inspected the fledgling headquarters of a planned multinational force that may one day oversee a Ukraine-Russia ceasefire. The BBC's Hugh Schofield has those details.
The headquarters is kind of only just beginning to be set up, but it is there. There is a physical place where military people from France, from Britain and elsewhere are beginning to talk about what would happen if there were a ceasefire and if this putative force had to go in. It needs to be ready, and so that's what's happening there.
The UN humanitarian chief, Tom Fletcher, says his teams need urgent access to the devastated Sudanese city of Al-Fashir to help civilians still stranded there. He says the number of people leaving the city has been lower than expected, and he's having a tough conversation with the paramilitary rapid support forces now controlling the city to let aid in. Fletcher is on a visit to the Darfur region, which he describes as a current epicenter of global inhumanity.
We want to get our investigation teams in urgently, and that's been part of the reason for me being here, is to negotiate the access for our teams. And of course, we want to get those life-saving aid convoys into Al-Fashir. We want to see the UN flag and our humanitarian partners inside Al-Fashir responding as best we can to the needs of the survivors.
And finally, the U.S. State Department says it will declare a Venezuelan criminal group cartel, the Los Soles, a foreign terrorist organization. The Secretary of State says President Nicolás Maduro heads the cartel, something the Venezuelan leader has, of course, denied. The BBC's Ian Wells has those details.
Cartel de los Soles is a term used by the US to describe an alleged criminal group involved in activities such as drug trafficking. Washington claims it is led by Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro, which he strongly denies. The US hasn't published evidence publicly of Maduro's direct involvement in drug trafficking, but its characterization of Maduro as a drug trafficker is seen as a way for the US to possibly justify targeting him or those close to him personally as part of its military campaign against alleged drug trafficking. Donald Trump said on Sunday that he could have discussions with Maduro and that he thinks Venezuela would like to have talks with the United States, but did not give further details.
The pulse of the continent in 60 minutes. Stay informed and inspired with Africa World Hour on Channel Africa.
That's exactly what we endeavour to do here. So do reach out to us, share your perspective on +27 63406 9126. Perhaps you're visiting South Africa for the first time and it's within this big discussion of the G20. One of the delegates, so many platforms are going to address so many different issues. And what do you think should stand out, and is it going to be framed in the way that will bring about change? So we start with this. Luanda in Angola will next week host the 7th AU-EU Summit. The African Union and European Union bringing together heads of state and government from the African Union and European member states to reaffirm their long-standing partnership and charter a renewed path of cooperation. Taking place on the 24th to the 25th of November 2025, the summit will mark 25 years of EU-AU partnership and comes at a pivotal time as Angola holds the rotating African Union presidency. It will be co-chaired by President of Angola, João Lourenço, and the President of the European Council, Antonio Costa Ntlantla. Mahlangu has this report.
Leaders of the two continents are expected to focus on strengthening cooperation in key areas such as peace and security, economic integration, trade, multilateralism, green development, digitalization, migration, mobility, and human development. The summit comes at a time of profound global uncertainties and shifting geopolitical dynamics. It is expected to offer an opportunity for both continents to reaffirm their shared commitment to multilateralism, solidarity, and joint action to address common challenges. Speaking at the Pan-African Parliament and the European Parliament landmark preparatory gathering for the African Union-European Union Summit parliamentary meeting in Midrand, South Africa at the weekend, PEP President Chief Fortune Charumbira said the upcoming summit of heads of state and government will review and take stock of the 25 years of partnership between the European Union and the African Union.
It's a very critical moment in the relationship between Africa and Europe. A lot has happened in the 25 years, that is since 2000, and it's proper to say what have we achieved and what not. And as you know, there are a lot of common things between Europe and Africa. We as the two parliaments, European Parliament, Pan-African Parliament, have found it fit and proper, representing the people's voices, to also say before the heads of state meet in Rwanda, we also meet as parliaments, the two parliaments, to take stock of the relationships between the two continents, but also between the two parliaments. What contributions have the two parliaments made to the partnership, or what would have been better done?
Hilde Vodmans, chair of the European Parliament delegation to the Africa-EU Parliamentary Assembly, says they expect concrete outcomes.
We don't want that summit in Angola to be just the next summit. We want our partnership to be renewed and with very much concrete results on the field. And that's why we, the elected people of European countries, came to Midrand to discuss the topics that are of the utmost importance of that summit. We talked about peace and security. We talked about the youth, the young people. We talked about economics, the minerals, the global gateway. And we talked, of course, about parliamentarian diplomacy. 4 subjects that we really want in that partnership to have a very strong message towards the Council and the summit meeting in Angola.
This year, the African Union and the European Union celebrate 25 years of their unique and successful partnership. The Africa-EU partnership was formally established in 2000 at the first Africa-EU summit in Cairo and continues to serve as a vital platform for political dialogue, economic collaboration, and cultural exchange between the two continents. The upcoming summit will build on the outcomes of the recent EU-AU ministerial held in Brussels in May 2025, where ministers reaffirmed their commitment to closer ties between the two continents, guided by shared values, mutual interests, and a joint vision for sustainable growth and stability. Reporting for Channel Africa, I am Nhlanhla Mahlangu in Johannesburg.
At 11 minutes past 9, Now, on to a very tragic story, I must say. News from Kebbi State in Nigeria, which say that armed gunmen have stormed a government girls' boarding school, killing the vice principal in cold blood and abducting at least 25 female students. The assailants, reportedly armed with sophisticated weapons, engaged in a gunfight with guards before making off with their captives. The vice principal, identified as Hassan Yakubu Makuku, was shot while trying to protect his students. The attack is the latest in a growing wave of violence against schools in northern Nigeria, where kidnapping by armed groups have become all too common. To speak about this, we're joined now by political analyst Dr. Moyosoluwa Dela Dada, lecturer at Miva Open University in Nigeria. A very good evening to you. Thank you so much for speaking to us. How are Nigerians taking in this latest news development, this latest tragic story, or has it just become so common that they seem almost immune to it?
Oh, thank you so much for having me. To answer that, I would say that Nigerians are not very pleased about what is going on, although it has become sort of a commonplace now, but is not expected. So Nigerians are not very pleased about it, and it has just increased the sense of not being safe. Like you cannot go do the random things without feeling like, oh, something is going to happen at different points in time. So just makes everyone question where the heart of government is at this point in time.
And let's talk about the nature of the perpetrators and their motive. It's often been said that these crimes are more motivated by ransom money, that in some cases that they are kidnapping these young women to enslave them. How should we be looking at this continuing dangerous trend, but also within the prism of national security? But I'm also thinking about women and children, how vulnerable they are in Nigeria at the moment.
Okay, so women and children are highly vulnerable right now in Nigeria. And I think we need to move past seeing this issue as banditry and calling it what it is, which is terrorism, because that affects the approach towards addressing this particular issue. Now, branding it as banditry just makes it seem like, oh, just a common criminal activity and not an existing ideological threat. And as such, measures targeted towards it is often increased policing rather than setting up long-term counter-terrorism measures. And as such, even in the international community, that level of support in terms of military and intelligence support is not there, because this is just branded as just merely banditry. And we can see that the activities in Nigeria has gone way beyond normal or what is expected in terms of the activities of bandits.
And I'm just wondering also the manner in which sometimes this is reported. It's often referred to as gunsmen who are pointed out as being behind these acts, but that lack of specifying which group is responsible, what does it say about the challenges and the landscape in Nigeria, particularly in as you speak about these banditry or militia networks? Does it speak to the ideology or lack thereof, or just an inertia on the part of state security?
Okay, so for that, I think branding them as gunmen without being specific as to who they are, I'm not even sure the government itself knows who these people are, because of the state of insecurity in the country and because of the nature of national security. So what this means is that everything is so fragmented, and even people rely on local chiefs, vigilantes, and even armed groups to keep themselves safe because they believe that the government cannot do that for them, right? And so sometimes you see clashes between different armed groups, and you cannot exactly tell where these groups are coming from. And the issue in Sahel right now doesn't really make matters easier, because right now the borders are porous. Guns are coming in, individuals, gunmen are just trooping in through the border without any form of checks. And so it's just like a really complicated and compounded problem right now. And sometimes it just feels like we're dealing with different groups, and sometimes it feels like, oh, we're dealing with the same group. But the fact is, it almost seems like the government does not even know what group we're dealing with per time.
And as you point to the regional insecurity, the influx of weapons and the instability that is occurring in surrounding areas. My question, though, and I pointed to this earlier on, why these criminals, bandits, militiamen, whatever we would dub them, are targeting schools in particular, but also their objective seems to be, in some cases, just the abduction of girl children. Has there been an analysis, a critical analysis of what the motive really is behind this, who stands to benefit? But the fact that it seems that the security architecture has not even been able to recover from the abduction of the Chibok girls. What does it say, in the larger scheme of things societally?
Well, I think that says that the government is still not able to control the activities of these bandits, is still not able to prevent them from invading rural spaces and, kidnapping people. And to answer your question as to why schools are like one of the most vulnerable areas that you could actually go in and like raid. And let's not forget that sometimes these schools are located in very ungoverned rural spaces with little to no security. And these bandits, they are aware of the security lapses in these areas, and so they take advantage of it. Now, to say as to whether why are they kidnapping females as opposed to I guess the other gender, I mean, I can't necessarily give you a straight answer for that, but I would then say that probably because it evokes this a sort of emotion that is being evoked where females are concerned. So fear is heightened, and like they are also able to get a sort of increased ransom and things like that. And let's also not forget that these girls sometimes are violated in so many cases, and some of them are forced to marry these people or have kids for them and things like that. So yeah, I think that's just
I
it.
think that's what I'm trying to understand, the gendered nature of these attacks, and obviously the long-term impact on the female population in general in Nigeria for generations. We're talking about on the education system, health system, but even on the economy, societally as well. And are civic organizations organizing themselves to plug that gap that the government seemingly cannot stop?
Yes, well, for that, I think I think that right now the CSOs are just trying to bridge existing gaps, that in terms of protection of the girl child, and just to make sure that no one is left behind, so to say. And this is in no way trying to say that, oh, the male children don't fall into situations like this, but the effect of this on the female gender is even much more worse, and they have to live with that trauma for a very, very long time, if not for the rest of their life. And so what this has done even to the female population in Nigeria is that most of them live in fear, and everyone is just trying to be careful because you do not know what is coming for you. You do not know who is coming for you. And you're not sure that even when these things come for you, you are going to survive it. So everyone is living right now with their eyes over their shoulders and just trying to take measures to ensure that they are safe.
All right. Thank you so much for speaking to us, political analyst Dr. Moyo Sula Dele Dada, who is at the Miva Open University in Nigeria.
Le monde entier a les yeux rivés sur Johannesburg. Les dirigeants des plus grandes économies mondiales se réunissent pour prendre des décisions qui façonneront les nations, les marchés et l'avenir. Vous savez déjà que Channel Africa sera sur place pour vous proposer des débats, des analyses et des points de vue essentiels. Suivez le sommet du G20 les 22 et 23 novembre en direct de l'Afrique. Restez connectés sur Channel Africa.
Darubini ya Afrika na I am Henry Shakif.
Deogratius Bwire, wewe kama mkurugenzi wa shirika la kutetea haki za binadamu kutoka kule Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. Maandamano yameendelea kwa siku ya pili. Nini kinaendelea?
Kwanza mimi ningependa tusiliweke kama wafuasi wa upinzani. Kwa sababu kiukweli mimi nilipata kidogo kushuhudia watu waliokuwa wanapita barabarani hawakuwa kwa namna yoyote ile wamebeba bendera ya chama chochote cha upinzani.
Umezungumzia swala zima vitu ambavyo havijakaa sawa vinapaswa kurekebishwa. Vitu hivyo ni nini?
Hiyo vitu ambavyo havijakaa sawa tayari nimeshavisema huko. Unajua kumekuwepo na mtiririko wa matukio mengi sana. Watu ambao wanakuwa wanapinga masuala kadha wa kadha ambayo yanaonekana kufanywa na vyombo vya dola kwenye mitandao au hata pia nje wamekuwa wakichukuliwa hatua.
Darubini ya Afrika kila Jumatatu hadi Ijumaa kuanzia saa 11 kamili hadi saa 12 kamili jioni majira ya Afrika ya Kati.
Africa World Hour. Africa World Hour. Unpacking global headlines from an African perspective.
And we continue doing that now. We look at news coming out of Westminster in the United Kingdom, where Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood unveiled what she calls the most sweeping reforms to tackle illegal immigration in modern times over the weekend. Mahmood doubled down on her argument that the UK must confront the pull factors that attract people to enter the country legally. Things like generous support, easy access to housing, and the promises of long-term settlement. Mahmood frames her approach as a moral mission, saying that illegal migration is tearing the country apart and sowing division in communities. Now, to make sense of this, we're joined by Craig Smith, a migration specialist. A very good evening to you, Craig. Thank you so much for speaking to us. Your thoughts on what the Home Secretary is saying and how she's also just framing the whole thing. And is it something that would be appealing to Britons at the moment, given the challenges that they've been facing? I mean, the globe at large really being impacted by geopolitical shifts.
Sure. Look, it's a worldwide phenomenon where the first world wealthier countries they have been complaining for a long time about illegal immigration and how it impacts on the economy and so many other aspects in terms of its public resources. But you must never forget, for centuries, these countries colonized the rest of the world, including Africa, Middle East, Asia, Americas. And it's time that they need to realize that migration is here to stay. People will move in good and bad times. And there are those times like asylum seekers deal with each and every day that we do not even appreciate what they go through in their home countries. Those are what we call the push factors, and it's a reality. In this day and age, there are many countries that are suffering through environmental disasters, war, economic issues, and those are typically considered to be factors that would want to compel those citizens to move to other places of safety or to be compelled to seek, whether we call it asylum shopping as the Home Secretary calls it, but they would be compelled to look for greener pastures, and rightfully so.
And I was just thinking about, as you say, in many cases when this argument comes out, the role of colonial powers, of imperial powers in the countries which they are still operating and are disturbing. is never really taken into account. So rewriting the rules for asylum seekers by restricting access to accommodation and financial support, is that something that's really going to have a long-lasting, sustainable impact on what they see as an overflow of migrants into their various countries?
Well, what you have is, for example, Nigel Farage, who leads the UK Reform Party. Who's heavy on immigration and restricting immigration, but like Donald Trump. What you have now is a Labour Party who's considered to be more liberal than the Conservatives, that seems to be adopting a hard line that Farage has articulated and championed, and he's gaining a lot of popularity. And now you have the Labour Party that's sort of mirroring his own his policies on migration, which are considered to be quite strict. But and what's happening within the Labour Party is that they talk of the backbenchers becoming quite disillusioned with these quite hardline attitudes. I don't think it's sustainable. I mean, a lot of the measures they talk about are making people contribute financially and also in terms of accommodation where they have maybe better opportunity than other asylum seekers. They'll get less benefit than others. But after all, it's just a policy document. I mean, I don't think it, I didn't see the news today, but in Parliament, I don't think it goes down very well, although the Reform Party would take credit for this hardline attitude. But I mean, it doesn't sound like a liberal sort of cue from what you would expect from the Labour Party. And also, if you think of the population in the UK, I think it's some 69 million. I mean, the percentage of asylum seekers pales into insignificance in effect. And you would think that the people who generally oppose, this sort of policy, tinkering at it, say that, look, at the end of the day, you can do whatever reforms you want. There are more fundamental things that should be happening within society than focusing on asylum seekers.
And is there a new refugee regime that we're seeing develop across particularly Europe? And we are seeing what President Donald Trump is doing with his own foreign policy in terms of whether it's sovereignty and humanitarian imperatives. And how helpful is it, what we're seeing? Is it based on data also?
Let's take Nigel Farage from the Reform Party. He says, look, it's a capacity issue. If the country only has resource for X number, X million population, and your population grows exponentially, it starts to suffer. And there's not enough financial resources to cover everyone in giving healthcare and all the rest, and the taxpayers will pay. That's the UK argument. America, to an extent, applies that argument, but there's another side to the UK immigration, and that is violence taking place in America, and they, again, blaming the illegal immigrants of being right at the forefront of that violence. And so that's what they attempt to justify, getting rid of the asylum seekers. It's no different anywhere in the world. They're often regarded as the scapegoats, where they're the vulnerable ones who unfortunately are singled out for many of the ills within a country, when there are actually bigger issues, more fundamental issues within the country itself.
And this hardline stance, we've seen Denmark take similar action, or it's pretty much modeled, if I understand, on what Denmark has done. But the question is, as we've seen Mahmoud speak about this moral stance, will it not have a trickle-down effect on the communities that these refugees stay in? Will it not result in some sort of destabilization, especially if you're saying that you're going to deal with the economic burden or demand that they contribute, these asylum seekers or migrants who are living in these communities?
Look, what they tried to do in Denmark, and apparently they've been successful in removing those failed asylum seekers. They say they've removed 95% of the failed asylum seekers. That means if you come into the country, in most countries that are signatories to these asylum instruments, which started from after the Second World War, you have the right to apply for asylum when you enter that country. The big challenge often is if you refuse these asylum seekers, there's the other side of removing them. And it does become quite difficult because we're dealing with human rights. You are dealing with then families that may come in seeking asylum, and it's very difficult to remove failed asylum seekers under the international laws. And that is the problem. And the problem, for example, in the UK would be they have the European Council for Human Rights, which the UK are signatories of. So you can have, even if you take a hard line on these refugee or these asylum policies, they'll get shot down in terms of removals. If they try and copy Denmark and say, we need to remove as many people who fail, it's probably not going to pass the test in the human rights courts, and government will effectively not achieve its objectives. So the question again is this an asylum issue, or is this more fundamental issues within your country and governance as opposed to asylum seekers? If you take the actual percentage of asylum seekers versus the population, it's insignificant.
All right. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Speaking to us about what is happening in the UK, just in terms of the suggestions being made on the refugee status, asylum seekers, challenges. Craig Smith is a migration specialist, and that brings the time to 27 minutes to 10.
Are you fluent in French, Chinyanja, Portuguese, and Kiswahili? Are you passionate about radio? And are you looking to work in South Africa? Do you have papers that qualify you to work in South Africa? In that case, we might have an opportunity for you to work for Channel Africa. Send us your CV and demo at newsroom@channelafrica.co.za. Remember, if you don't hear from us within 14 days, it means you have not made it or you have not been selected. Channel Africa, the African perspective. The world is watching Johannesburg. Leaders from the planet's biggest economies gather to make decisions that shape nations, markets, and futures. You already know Channel Africa will be right there, bringing you the conversations, insights, and analysis that matter.
The best is yet to come.
The G20 Summit from the 22nd to the 23rd of November. As it happens, from an African perspective, stay tuned to Channel Africa and get all the G20 analysis. Tsepiso Makwetla winds it down on Africa World Hour, 9 to 10 p.m.
And speaking of the G20, this evening on Africa World Hour, we look at how, as South Africa hosts the G20 Social Summit this week, all eyes are on a very pivotal gathering taking place tomorrow, a high-level side event titled Women, Newborns, Children's and Adolescents' Health, a unifying agenda for global progress, co-hosted by the G20 Presidency, the Global Leaders Network, PMNCH, and the Youth, Women and Civil Society tracks. This event is set to ignite major global momentum on health and human capital. My apologies. So tonight we speak to Levi Singh, Sherpa for Youth 20 South Africa, to unpack why youth voices are shaping the agenda and what to expect from tomorrow's kickoff event as well. Levi, very good evening to you. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us.
Good evening, Tsepi, and good evening to your viewers and listeners.
So let's just start with this Jail Inside event. And how important it is and why it is. It kicks off the social summit. What is the core purpose of the gathering, and why are they thinking that a youth agenda, a women agenda is going to really gain momentum at the G20?
Thanks, Tsepi. So as your listeners and viewers would know, this is the first time that the African continent hosts a G20. It's also the first time that the African Union is a full member of the G20. And the next time that we will host a G20 is in 2044. And ultimately, when you consider the current demographics on the African continent, with the median age of an African in Africa being 19 years old, with 60% of the population of the African continent being under the age of 30, we need to really frame the argument around human capital development. And there can be no better way to harness and form human capital development than through the investments in women, children, and adolescent health in particular. And as the Y20, we're incredibly proud to support President Ramaphosa's leadership of the Global Leaders Network on Women, Children, and Adolescent Health, the first of its kind leaders network that convenes heads of states to really ensure that we ramp up political commitment and political will, as well as financial resourcing, to ensure that women, children, and adolescents are at the center of national development, and in particular, the African continent's development.
Levi, as you say, those aid cuts are something that have been a significant item agenda on a lot of the discussions we've seen throughout the year, but also for various countries and groupings when we look at the SDG goals. So the various partnerships that you've mentioned that bring together this event tomorrow, what kind of unified commitments are they looking for the organizers to catalyze, especially women's, newborns, children's and adolescents' health?
It's a bit difficult to preempt the conversation just yet. I think it's a wait and see. But ultimately, we have great philanthropies such as Gates, and we have other multilaterals that have been trying their hardest to ensure that the recent and profound cuts to the development ecosystem doesn't necessarily extend too harshly onto the women, children, and adolescent health agenda. And ultimately, I think we'll be seeing from colleagues tomorrow what is the level of thinking around how to preserve the fragile sort of funding landscape that is already being directed towards these agendas, but also looking at innovative financing and other sort of financing approaches, including partnerships with the public and private sector to really ring-fence resources for this important development agenda. And ultimately, I think looking ahead, there is some thinking around looking at a common investment framework that member states and philanthropic and other actors can consider in terms of coordinating investments as it pertains to this important agenda. We all know money is getting tighter and tighter as public fiscus continue to either shrink or stagnate in the global south. And ultimately, we need to look at all forms of partnerships that can unlock new resources. But we also need to consider how to ensure that the resources that we have already allocated to these agendas are being spent in an efficient and an effective manner. And that also includes curbing corruption and maladministration. And this is something that has also been discussed in the context of the G20, from the anti-corruption working group to the ministerial working group on health, as well as the development working group. So I think a multi-pronged approach really is something that we aim to explore on tomorrow's panel, and to really hear from the ministers as well as the former deputy president herself as to what are some of the catalytic interventions that we could consider to unlock new resources for this incredibly important agenda.
So one of the big expectations for the GLN is for WNCAH to be elevated in the Social Summit Declaration. That is something that's going to take leadership, as we've seen some of the big powers, influential powers, who won't be coming to the G20, and those are very important. The Health Working Group came out without a resolution because of quibbles over certain aspects of the agenda. From your perspective, as the youth, are we seeing enough leadership? Are we at least seeing good leadership come out of these challenges, especially when we talk about the foundational investments for equity and resilience?
That's a interesting question, Seppi, and I wonder how long we have to unpack it. But I think given this last year and given our intimate work with the presidency, I still stand by my earlier statement to commend the leadership of President Ramaphosa and the South African presidency as it pertains to the leadership of the Global Leaders Network for Women, Children and Adolescent Health. I think given South Africa's long history in the multilateral space, this really does catalyze and build on the existing work that South Africa has led, for instance, when the Sustainable Development Goals were being negotiated and ultimately adopted, and looking at the Every Woman and Every Child strategy, which then really looked at the life course investments that need to be made in women, children, and adolescent health, our own domestic leadership in South Africa as it pertains to the fight against HIV and AIDS, towards tuberculosis and other disease burdens. I think we have a really rich history as South Africa and as the South African state as it pertains to some of these progressive agendas. Do we get it right all the time? Absolutely not. But as it is compared to other member states and powerful and influential global north member states in particular, we tend to be a bit more consistent in how we show up for many of these progressive agendas. And ultimately, I think it's really about continuing to locate the leadership, not just of South Africa, but of the Southern African region and on the African continent, but in particular, the leadership of the Global South. And if you look at many of the other complex challenges that we're facing at this time, from global inequality and poverty to unemployment, in particular the climate crisis, as we talk, COP30 is happening in Brazil, and it's the Global South that is really leading the charge as it pertains to calling for a more equitable approach to climate financing, a more sustainable approach to some of the means of consumption and production that we've been seeing play out within this geoeconomic and geopolitical space. So I think we really must center the leadership of the Global South and commend the leadership of the Global South, and really try as non-state actors and as young people to continue strengthening the leadership of the Global South as it pertains to many of these progressive agendas, because in many cases it feels as if we can't really rely on the goodwill and the altruism that has historically been displayed by many of the players in the G7. Ultimately, we've seen over the last few years, in particular during the COVID-19 pandemic, how many of these richer countries were speaking about solidarity, but also hoarding vaccines, whilst countries like South Africa and India and Brazil were advocating quite hard at places like the World Trade Organization, the IMF and the World Bank to secure special drawing rights for member states, to ensure that there were democratized access to vaccines and other pharmaceutical innovations during COVID. So I'd really say we need to, again, locate our focus on Global South leadership at this time where we see polarization. We will work with the Global North, but ultimately I think that there's a certain moral courage that is being displayed by the Global South that we need to continue centering and supporting.
And just very briefly, as you say, Levi, this is what the Global Leaders Network is aiming to achieve, solidifying that with the event tomorrow. And I want to talk about then the role of youth in global health diplomacy and the challenges that we face. Given the first, I say we, I'm still a youth clearly in my head, but the point is just looking at the demographic weight of the youth and the challenges that are faced with the rollback of even things like sexual and reproductive health rights. What do you hope to achieve tomorrow in terms of the power of youth diplomacy?
Thanks, Epi. And since I know you since I was 17 years old, you will remain forever young in my eyes. Look, I think from a youth and global health diplomacy perspective, we've worked quite ardently as the Y20 to ensure that we have as progressive as possible language in the context of our own Y20 communique. We got into many long hours of debate and negotiation with many of our G20 member state counterparts on issues pertaining to gender, on intersectionality, and the issue of sexual reproductive health and rights and sexual reproductive health and reproductive rights. And we've also followed the conversations in Women's 20. We follow the conversations at Civil Society 20, just to ensure that we're coordinating positions to at least hold the line at the minimum of what we've agreed to in terms of the Sustainable Development Goals, especially as they pertain to good health and to gender equality. So in the context of the social summit, we really want to ensure that there's at least specific language that speaks to the importance of meaningfully engaging and institutionalizing the participation of civil society, in particular youth and women-led organizations, to ensure that these conversations that are focused on reforming global governance, multilateralism, really have young people and women's voices at the table. But as it pertains to development agendas, I don't think we can shy away from these issues of sexual reproductive health rights and gender equality. Ultimately, for the African continent, as I had said earlier, median age on the continent, 19 years old, 60% of our continent is under the age of 30. Young people are saying that they want rights, they want dignity, they want choices. Whether you look at Madagascar, Nairobi, any part of this continent, young people are crying out for those three things. And one of the best investments we can make in terms of securing our future and a possible demographic dividend on the African continent that ensures young people are set on productive pathways to adulthood, that they can have their autonomy and that they can express themselves with dignity and with rights, is by investing in their sexual reproductive and health rights. So contentious issue at this time due to geopolitics and the current prevailing culture wars. But when we speak to young people, ultimately they say they want rights, they want choices, they want dignity. And at the center of those three elements is sexual reproductive health rights. And at the center of human capital development, ultimately, is sexual reproductive and health rights. We can't harness a demographic dividend if women can't choose what they can do with their bodies, whether they wish to have children or not have children, whether they wish to marry or not marry, whether they wish to delay a pregnancy or not be pregnant at all. And ultimately, we will continue to advocate for the full recognition of these rights in the context of the G20, regardless of the reservations that are placed by other member states.
And I think that's a very powerful note to end it on. We really look forward to hearing more from you and those who will be gathered at this event. It's the Global Leaders Network's side event at the G20 Social Summit tomorrow, which kicks off the summit. It is titled Women's, Newborns, Children's and Adolescents Health, a Unifying Agenda for Global Progress. And that is the Y20 Sherpa Levi Singh speaking to us about some of the discussions that they're going to have and what is really at the center of the call for the event, the objectives. So it brings the time to 11 minutes to 10. We were hoping to speak to Me Winnie Buanyima, speaking about her call for an urgent release of her husband. And we're speaking here about Dr. Kiza Besije in Uganda. Unfortunately, we are unable to reach her at the moment. We'll continue trying, and we are hoping if we don't get her today, we certainly will tomorrow. But let's look forward to what's coming up on African Diaries this evening. And Shayla's out, but Kitty's here. What's happening, Kitty?
Hi, how are you?
Good, thanks. And you?
Good. So as always a fun jam-packed show. Within the first hour, it's all things about our Dear Diary entries, and also we're going to be focusing on our wrap-up highlights for the day as well. So that's all in the first hour. And then continuing with the first hour, we are going to be focusing on trending ways of healthy meal preps. We are going to be also checking out the art and the science of meal prepping in an African style with an African twist, of course. And joining us as our first guest is Shaina Hill, and she is a dietitian who is, been helping people reclaim their time, health, and wallets as well. Just to make it more consuming for everybody in terms of finances as well. And that's all in the first hour. And then the second hour, we're crossing over to our African diaries. Well, we of course going to be on African diaries and all things skincare with a dermatologist by the name of Nompilo Krista. She's going to be chatting to us, discussing how love and care for your African skin with wisdom, science, and heart. And it's going to be interesting because I don't have a skin regime, so.
I was saying that to Shayla the other day. She said I was bragging. I was like, no, actually I don't.
No.
And I was actually thinking about it. There's a friend who bought us, it was a girls' get together, went away, and we were exchanging gifts. So she bought us soya candles. And I remember her saying, this was quite a number of years ago, 6, 7, she was saying, guys, you can eat this, you can do all kinds of things with it. And I thought, oh, I'm not about to eat that candle. But I tell you what, it worked. Every time I leave it at my mother's house.
Yeah.
And every time I want to put something on my hands or on my face, I put that on. It is the most beautiful, luxurious feeling on the skin, whether it's my hands or the face. Yes, and I definitely want to get those soya candles because they're absolutely amazing.
I drink sea moss, so I actually want to see what it's like to put sea moss directly on your skin.
I've tried that as well.
Really?
And it's good. It really does help clear up and it just revitalizes your
I'm
skin.
useless with skin
So
regimes,
I know
it's very embarrassing to have these kind of conversations with women when you're like, what do you do for your skin?
But the gold sea moss is the one that you want for that.
Oh really?
Yes.
Oh my gosh. Okay, that's actually nice to know because I drink the normal sea moss with a bit of water and I just drink it for the great properties that it has. So it's going to be interesting having these conversations to know more about meal preps. Are you into meal preps?
We all should be, and it makes for easier life. But I'm interested about hearing about it from an African meal prep perspective because I'm thinking,
but it's said that people who cook every day are less to consume a lot of calories versus to people who cook like once or twice a week.
Which is absolutely true.
It makes a lot of sense, So I think we all need to get into meal prepping because it seems to be the drive. I think people want to live a healthier life these days,
You have to, given what we're facing.
Yeah.
Thanks, Kitty. It is now 7 minutes to 10.
1 hour, one continent, one voice. Africa World Hour with Tsepiso Makwetla on Channel Africa, the African perspective.
And we end with this video of a Chinese national assaulting a Kenyan worker at a Nairobi roofing company has ignited public outrage and calls for deportation. The incident has once again raised concerns, really, about the mistreatment of Kenyan workers by some foreign employers. From Nairobi, here is Channel Africa's Daniel Ominde with those details.
A Chinese national is facing deportation from Kenya after a video of him assaulting a Kenyan co-worker surfaced online. In the video that has sparked mass public outrage, the Chinese national is seen raining blows and kicks on a seemingly restrained co-worker at a roofing products company in Kenya. The Kenyan trade union's umbrella body KOTU has since demanded for the immediate deportation of the said Chinese national and has extended similar demands on what they call other rogue Chinese investors in the country. The incidents, which has led to massive public outrage, brings to the fore increasing cases of workplace harassment reported in Kenya. In 2018, a Chinese national was deported from the country after being recorded making racist slurs against Kenyans. In subsequent years, we have also seen several viral clips showing individual Chinese supervisors physically or verbally abusing Kenyan workers at construction sites or even factories. TCM Roofing Mabati, the employer of the Chinese national at the center of the current case, has since issued a statement saying that the worker has been sacked and that plans are underway to send him back to China. as at the time of going to press, there was no indication of any other action taken by local authorities. Earlier on, I spoke to former Law Society of Kenya President Isaac Okero, who observed that forcing employees to work in an unconducive environment could be interpreted as subjecting those employees to forced labor according to Kenyan law. Here's what he had to say.
This means that all employers, including foreign investors, must recognize that their employees have inherent dignity under Article 28 and the protection thereof, that they are not required to perform forced labor, and that they have a right to reasonable working conditions. In fact, under Rule 3 of the Employment General Rules, an employer subjecting an employee to working under undue threat may be deemed to be subjecting him to forced labor.
The Chinese embassy in Kenya has also posted a statement on their X account saying that they were extremely disappointed to see such an incident occur. They also added that the embassy consistently requires Chinese citizens in Kenya to strictly abide by local laws, regulations, and cultural customs, and that the vast majority of them do so. The statement continues, "We believe this isolated incident should not affect investment cooperation between Chinese and Kenyan companies, but it is a reminder to all Chinese citizens in Kenya to uphold the principle of mutual respect to Kenyan friends and behave in accordance to the laws and regulations and cultural customs of Kenya." That just shows the Chinese embassy trying to move in and forestall any diplomatic tensions that may arise between the two countries as a result of these increasing cases being reported of Chinese employers or even employees working for Chinese companies mistreating their Kenyan counterparts. Daniel Omide, reporting for Channel Africa from Nairobi.
And that's how we come to the end of Africa World Hour, but not before we tell you about the Chief Executive Officer of the Nigerian South African Chamber of Commerce, Diana Gomez, saying that the Chamber has been instrumental in helping businesses from both countries expand seamlessly into new markets. She made the remarks at the Chamber as the Chamber celebrated its 20th anniversary with a special cocktail forum in Johannesburg, South Africa. Channel Africa's economics reporter Innocent Samosa ends the show with this.
The event brought together key partners and industry leaders, including representatives from Standard Bank, Access Bank, the Nigerian High Commission, South Africa's Department of Trade, Industry and Competition, board members of the Chamber, to reflect on trade relations between the two countries. Tamsin Fremantle is the president of South Africa Nigeria Business Chamber.
How a chamber like ours, the South African Nigeria Business Chamber, can actually facilitate these kind of conversations and what value they add is that we bring together government on both sides, but we also bring together very key private sector players who can talk in an environment that is provided for them to be enabling, but they have access to the entire network and ecosystem. And the value of any chamber is its members and the ecosystem and the way that it can work with government to make sure that the business environment is the best that it can be.
The Chamber CEO, Diana Games, highlights some of its biggest achievements over the past 12 years.
I think our biggest achievement actually over the years has been creating a safe space for competitors, for Africans from other countries, for Nigerians to come and be in a space where professionalism and information, insights, all of those things are really well appreciated. And we've created a big network of people, both South Africans, Nigerians and others over the years, who have really supported us and come to events, got to know each other, forged their own networks, etc. So I'd say that kind of networking has been a big part of our achievement over the years.
But which sectors should the Chamber focus on next for growth? Senior corporate investment banker, Rand Merchant Bank, Suresh Chaitu, had this to say.
We have a presence in Nigeria, in the financial services sector, and we have about $2 billion invested in Nigeria. I think some of the key sectors that we should be focusing on for both Nigeria and South Africa. Number one is obviously the major technological innovation and digitization of our businesses, not only in the financial services sector, but if you look at all areas of healthcare, in education, in infrastructure.
And that's how we come to the end of Africa World Hour from us. Thanks for listening, watching. Up next is African Diaries.
Conversations that touch the heart and inspire change. Here